things which made me understand how the world works, as well as that artificial intelligence is the most dangerous thing. And I mean, that's not me saying it, that's a lot of smart people agree on this. And you basically saw how AI was being used to shut down a free discourse, okay? And in my world, everyone should raise their concerns and should not be shut down and labeled as something. And the moment when the propaganda psychosis was so big that even my parents-in-law labeled me as a right-wing conspiracy theorist, made me really afraid being a German, okay? Because we went in the last 80 years 2 times into a psychosis. So we have a lot of knowledge how fast it can go and why it's, happening. And I was like, wow, that's really scary. And I first understood how my grandparents became Nazis, but most of the Germans, not because they were Nazis, because psychosis. If there's one single point where you can attack, it's just a matter of time until someone will attack there. It's just like history. Or if you think you have one indirect world government, indirectly with social scoring and digital IDs and a digital dollar, digital euro, it's playing Russian roulette. Even though we assume that all of the actors are nice people, it's just a matter of time until a bad actor comes.
Mm-hmm. So I just want to illustrate the point here, because you're saying a lot of really important things. And I think, most people, when they think about nomads, are thinking about people who love to travel and they just want to be able to be free and live in different places that offer better quality of life or whatever it is. But here it's nomad as a defense for a failure of local or global governments that are becoming authoritarian and leveraging AI to influence their own propaganda or whatever it is. And like you said, create this psychosis or some kind of brainwashing of their populace. So it's not just digital nomads going to Bali to enjoy the beach. It's also nomadic lifestyle as a defense against larger government players who, if you live in their country, and even if you don't live in their country, but they have power over the country that you're living in, can have a really deep impact over your life in general. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Network State podcast. Today, we are joined by Daniel Go to understand how nomads would benefit from a network state and why it matters to global geopolitics. Daniel Go is a German software engineer who has led an unconventional life shaped by his experiences of growing up in post-communist Germany, being brainwashed in India, and now residing in Malta. As the founder of CoCoHub, the world's leading decentralized digital nomad community, Daniel is a visionary entrepreneur who is always pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Daniel is now embarking on his next ambitious project, aiming to create the world's first nomad network state. With his extensive experience in developing innovative digital solutions, he is uniquely positioned to bring this vision to life. Daniel's track record is impressive. He played a pivotal role in introducing the digital nomad visa in Malta and co-founded the first open source network state, SaaS, or Society as a Service platform, as well as the Network State Foundation. He has organized real-life meetups across the globe, bringing together like-minded individuals who share his passion for a decentralized future. As an advocate for the decentralized economy, Daniel is passionate about creating a future that is free from the constraints of traditional nation-states. With his pioneering spirit and unwavering commitment to making a difference, Daniel Go is someone to watch as he continues to blaze a trail towards a more equitable and decentralized world. So, Daniel, welcome to the interview.
Thank you, Adrian, for having me. Exciting times. And I'm really thrilled to just share my story, where we are standing in the moment, also to be a little bit more transparent about my personality. And at the same time, I think it's quite interesting what I have to share. So maybe I start giving you a short overview where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I would love if you could tell us a little bit more in detail about yourself and what you're working on.
So I'm born in 1988, 2 years before the fall of the Soviet Union. Based, from Germany, always being into computers. I had my first computer by the age of 5. And of course, being raised in a post-Soviet environment, because even when the Soviet Union ended in 1990 and I was 2 years old, still our teachers, okay, they came from this era and everything still looked like this. So of course, I think it's quite interesting experiment what was being done in Germany, dividing one culture into two separate economic systems, letting it run for 40 years and then see how one culture, of course we have local differences, but one culture is developing into different directions. So as a lot of people in Germany, when they want to study, they need to move to a different place because you can't pick your university. So the story is that a lot of young people from the East, they move to the West, and then they are confronted with something which is really similar, really different. So even though culture is similar, the people are really different. And we never understood why this is happening. So both parties always pointed finger at the others. You are strange, you are strange. So this is just like a side note because we can apply this later to different operation systems in society and how they will form. Society, long story short, being a software developer, never went to any office. So I was always lucky to be self-employed, started my Nomad journey in 2010, going to India and Southeast Asia. So I'm not a traditional nomad. I lived abroad and I traveled in Southeast Asia, but now I'm kind of based in Malta. So yeah, and somehow ended up here winning at the startup contest in Germany, getting a little bit of money and going to Malta and opening one of the first co-working spaces here, but at the same time also realizing that incoming people need to live somewhere. So we took the idea of a German living community. This was December 2016, and just brought it over here to Malta and just rented a big house and lived together with other remote workers. And this was before the term digital nomad or co-living really was an industry. So we were quite lucky that there was no background noise because there were only a handful of those houses in Europe, more even in Asia. So we positioned CoCoHub without any investment, just by having it as a project run by friends and volunteers as the #1 brand for co-living. But I always knew that this is not the goal. It's not inspiring for me to create the next booking platform. So already in 2016, when we wanted to protect our little brand against billions of investment coming in, especially in the US, it's a €1 billion market, this co-living, we thought about how can we do it? And at the same time, how can we help others who want to establish their cities as nomad hotspots with software? So we already pitched a DAO, a co-living DAO, to investors here in Malta in 2017, but it was far too early, okay? No one saw this coming. At the same time, we already knew that something like a digital nomad visa will come up along the way. And we were always loud about this idea, but still we were considered as a hippie movement. You know, we are extremists traveling the world. The digital nomad community is still small, but back then it was even smaller. Everyone knew each other. So it was really helpful to have this word of mouth effect. At the same time, we got featured at Y Combinator at their Twitter. So this also helped us to get a lot of free traffic. Long story short, then of course, COVID came. So we did this CoCoHub here in Malta for 2 years, had 2 co-living houses, then closed the houses and just worked with partners, because I think that's the way to scale, to have no physical assets, because when you have physical assets, you make yourself attackable, which also later applies to nomad states, what we will talk about later. So yeah, we developed this concept to have different ambassadors all around the world, as well as embassies in 2017. And I'm living here in Malta, right next to the Fort St. Angelo. So Malta was always the home for digital knights. They exist since 950 years, are the most powerful decentralized entity in the world, have their own passport, their own currency. So putting all those things together, you already have some kind of blueprint, what you need to do. And I didn't decide to go into the idea of network states. I was never a conscious decision. It was always like a natural development, because when COVID started, I mean, 2 things happened. The first thing happened is that traditional countries started to issue nomad visas. So they started to compete for the first time for humanity. Okay, we have 54 countries now doing this. There will probably be a European nomad visa at one point, but this is basically empowering people.
Was that the first one, the European?
No, the European doesn't exist, but it's being discussed, and it would make sense probably. Maybe not, because the European Union is also quite diverse. In Malta, you need to have 2,700 euros income in a month. In Croatia, maybe it's less. So yeah, a European digital nomad visa will come, because we need smart people. That's the battle, no? So the one thing has happened, that countries started to compete for high income, highly skilled, nice people who are not mad. So I'm also not saying, you know, nomad in the sense of that they are nomadic. This will fade away. This is not a sustainable lifestyle, even though I'm from one of the richest nomadic families in the world. We are like coming from a gypsy musician family who is quite famous. So this nomadic, yeah, nomadism runs into my DNA, basically. But coming back to what also happened during COVID, I saw how governance goes crazy. And of course, even before that, you always had idealists, you know, who would criticize the current system, or extremists or something. And yeah, the world is not an ideal place, but it was kind of senseless to go against, because you could always escape and create your own reality, like me to Malta. Why should I care about so many other people? But yeah, I saw basically upcoming AI in 2019, 2020, and even before. And I saw that something was, felt really strange, you know, what was happening with COVID, taking away the sovereignty of every single doctor, of every single country, and trying to find a one suits all approach. At the same time, seeing how our governments, and we are from really sophisticated countries like Germany or France, where you always had like democracy, and you could just face a policeman, and you know there's the rule and law, and I don't need to be scared. You know, we never needed to be scared. For the first time, I was scared. For whatever reason this is happening, maybe we are at the end of a capitalist cycle, or social media is all making us, you know, crazy, or it's AI. It's a lot of things coming basically together, and I don't want to pinpoint it down. So yeah, it kind of escalated to the fact that I was sitting in Germany. It was Christmas, before Christmas 2021, with my parents-in-law, and I looked out of the window and I saw police going crazy. And I put my wrist on the table and I said, you know what? I will start my own country in the internet. I knew that this was just, this was not real because it was not reflected in reality. The book Network State was not written. I had no money, being exiled from my own home here in Malta, because I could not come back because they required this particular vaccination. Anyway, I said I will start my own country and we need technology for this. So we need technology. It's not something you can just do out of your gut feeling. So I wanted to write my PhD about this topic, network states. So I already had my supervisor in place, and then luckily Balaji came around in this book. And I was like, okay, humanity's saved 3 years. Okay, we can execute now. So actually, I tried to reactivate BitNation, which was one of the first network states, 2014, out of Berlin. I tried to reactivate them, but it was not successful. So out of this, the Governance Research Institute evolved, which was also not successful because there were no points where we could act, you know, and there was no clear roadmap for network states. So I was in Germany, coming back to Malta, and there was a Ukrainian lady who wanted to meet me here. And she said, there's someone else who wants to meet you, which turned out to be an investor from Russia. And he came to Malta, and this was in November 2021, so before the war. And we spent 4 days together discussing the idea of network states and what needs to be done. And we didn't need to speak like a lot. But he said we only need to reach 4% of humanity. So because the idea is, how do you transition the whole world? It's quite unrealistic to do this in our lifetime. But he said, no, we just need to create an antidote. 4% of humanity. Okay, if we peak at 10 billion, that's 400 million. So, and there are projections in 10 years from now or 12 years from now, there will be 1 billion remote workers. It's just free market, you know, software companies, they need to offer this, otherwise they will not get great developers. So this will happen. And I was like, that's the target audience for network states. It makes sense to kind of start with them. Because remote workers, as I said, highly skilled, they have an affiliation for technology. They are not stuck in their national mindset because they already lived abroad and understood different cultures. So they are the ideal target audience, I think, to start with. Yeah, now you need to ping me in the right direction because you see it's so complex and I could talk forever.
Totally. Yeah. So, you know, this is actually a nice deep dive into the background. You touched on a lot of things that I wanted to touch on later. Also, can you just center yourself in the frame? Because I want to see everything as you're speaking. But yeah, so I want to first go back in time to when you first started about this, and then we can dive into these other pieces that you've brought up. So I just want to illustrate for everybody the point of why this emerged as a need. So why it became important in the first place for you in particular, right? Someone who, as you said, has this in your DNA from your family's background and history, to seeing it as a potential solution for the future of your life. So what was the need, right? It was fear from what was happening during COVID, and seeing how governments could break down in these times of turmoil and uncertainty. And then there was also this other piece of it, which is being exiled from Malta, where you were living, because you refused to get a certain vaccination, and that also could completely destabilize your future. So there's these real existential threats that you were facing for what your life could look like, and you chose to create an alternative solution using this technology as a potential to make your own country and your own rules, right? So let's talk about just if you could go back in time to how you were feeling in that moment, just to illustrate for people, right? Like that fear, what was that like for you? And why did that trigger the desire to start something that would eradicate that for the future?
I would like, the thing is, my advisors always tell me, Daniel, don't get tangled up into those temporary issues. Okay, we should not speak about COVID or whatever, because this is just a symptom. It could be everything, you know. So first of all, the main motivation is that I never felt kind of welcome in our society, always as an outsider, a little bit strange. I don't understand why people need to behave like robots, taking life so serious, especially in Germany. And I didn't understand it. We are the most efficient, richest country in the world. Why do we live like this? Okay. But that's like the deeper thing. But the things which made me understand how the world works, as well as that artificial intelligence is the most dangerous thing. And I mean, that's not me saying it, that's a lot of smart people agree on this. And you basically saw how AI was being used to shut down a free discourse, okay? And in my world, everyone should raise their concerns and should not be shut down and labeled as something. And the moment when the propaganda psychosis was so big that even my parents-in-law labeled me as a right-wing conspiracy theorist, made me really afraid being a German, okay? Because we went in the last 80 years 2 times into a psychosis. So we have a lot of knowledge how fast it can go and why it's, you know, happening. And I was like, wow, that's really scary. And I first understood how my grandparents became Nazis, but most of the Germans, not because they were Nazis, because psychosis. So this was one, and I saw how AI will attack at centralized governance points, okay, and you cannot protect them, you know? You just need to see where is the origin of a narrative that's often Reddit or Twitter, and you can probably analyze this, and then it spreads into the world, you know, like Facebook, then it goes to the messengers, and then it somehow ends in the last, like on television, you know, after a certain amount of time. And you just need to identify where do you attack. And I hosted guests at CoCoHub here in Malta physically who openly spoke about, this was 2018, how they use really primitive AI. And they were paid $20,000 to do it, to push Trump on Reddit. And back then you needed to pay Polish hackers 20K, okay, because large language models were not that sophisticated and super expensive to run. So I was like, should I throw them out or not? I didn't throw them out. And what cost 20,000 euros in 2018 to achieve will cost you now maybe 10 or next to nothing. The whole Reddit is flooded. And also, I mean, who owns the most sophisticated AI rules the world. Okay, this is just like how we need to have a battle of AIs. You cannot regulate it, it's bullshit. I mean, you can regulate it in the US and the Western world, but China will give a fuck. So then they rule the world. And I would call it a reality creation engine, AI. And if we would not have shut down the Russian opinion about this war, the first thing they said, we do it because we cannot fight back in a digital war. Okay, you create, you have the technology. And I mean, ChatGPT, this is what we have. Just imagine you have unlimited resources and one query costs you 10K to compute. And some people have this. They are already 10 years from now. And there's no way how to fight back, to protect yourself. And that's why we need to decouple ourselves, but not in the sense that we put our phones down and delete. Social media doesn't work because you are still part of society, okay? And this society can still be influenced. So understood centralized governance and AI. There is no future. We need to break it down, because when you want to create one centralized governance system, and we are just talking, for example, about this digital ID management for vaccinations. If there's one single point where you can attack, it's just a matter of time until someone will attack there. It's just like history. Or if you think you have one indirect world governance government, indirectly with social scoring and digital IDs and a digital dollar, digital euro, it's playing Russian roulette. You know, even though we assume that all of the actors are nice people, it's just a matter of time until a bad actor comes.
So I just want to illustrate the point here, because you're saying a lot of really important things, and I think, you know, most people, when they think about nomads, are thinking about people who love to travel and they just want to be able to be free and live in different places that offer better quality of life or whatever it is. But here it's nomad as a defense for a failure of local or global governments that are becoming authoritarian and leveraging AI to influence their own propaganda or whatever it is, and like you said, create this psychosis or some kind of brainwashing of their populace. So it's not just digital nomads going to Bali to enjoy the beach. It's also nomadic lifestyle as a defense against larger government players who, if you live in their country, and even if you don't live in their country, but they have power over the country that you're living in, can have a really deep impact over your life in general. So that's why just a point I wanted to highlight. But on that topic, I wanted also to move into why you see nomadic lifestyle as a defense. Can you explain how the technology of a network state or a unified digital nomad community or network state would be a defense against these larger players?
Okay, that's a good question. When we thought about how the first society as a service platform should look like, we came to the conclusion, together with my advisor, so it's a group of people, I'm not the genius here, it's a group of people. We said our currency should be based on karma or human interaction, and the software should be like WordPress, but we call it WorldPress. And the plugins, they will be dApps, decentralized apps. And we don't even have the first blog in existence. You know, like WordPress was developed in order to enable blogs by Matt Mullenweg. And yeah, I see network states being the blocks. And this was also the issue. How can you program a framework for something which doesn't even exist? So we don't even know which questions to ask. But what we also identified is, you can call them pillars of control if you want to frame it in a negative way or in a positive way, things a human needs to feel as a human. And you can go on, but the most important pillars or services are, you need to have your tribe, you know, your society, your belonging. You need to have education, you need to have a job, you need to have accommodation job, you need to have insurance, you need to have currency, you need to have education for your kids, and you can go on and on and on. And also you need to have access to a territory, so like a residence permit. We have the most powerful passports in the world, so I don't even understand this issue, you know, but I understood the issue once we were locked in our cities, okay? And I felt how others might feel their whole life. And this is a feeling I don't want for anyone. And most people live like this, how we live during COVID. They cannot leave their country. You don't even have a passport. Anyway, passport coming back. and you identify those pillars. And you start with the easiest one, which we can replace. One is passports or like access to territory, which are nomad visas. So we kind of started with this to hack the system from behind. And this is also my approach, not to go into confrontation with existing countries or whatsoever. Just tell them there will be a change and we want to work with you. For example, Malta has an interest to attract nomads because they contribute to the GDP. 50 million since the nomad visa has been issued. So yeah, and then you go on and jobs, income. You can get a remote job from a US company, from a German company, and live in Bulgaria. Why not? Accommodation, for example, co-living, which should be co-owned at one point. Because one of the biggest things which keeps this 9-to-5 matrix together is rent. You know, I mean, it's a big problem. We need a big reset now. And yeah, I mean, it cannot be, no matter if you're in London or New York or Munich, it's too expensive, even as if a high-paid software developer who cannot afford anymore to buy a one-bedroom apartment. So then you need the co-living DAO. And I am also now the advisor of co-living DAO, two guys from London, who also had a bad experience staying at one big co-living operator because they pay a lot of rent. In the end, they have no assets. So in all those decentralized apps, we need to develop them. I mean, this is generally the problem in the crypto space, that nothing is connected. Nothing connects it, you know? So I think, yeah, and to answer your questions, I mean, if you put all of the eggs into one basket, and this is linked to a territory, the person who has control over the territory has power over you. And we will never reach this perfect state where no one has control over you. There are always local laws. We have to stick to them, but we are able to challenge, because the moment Malta would, for example, say, oh, out of a sudden gay people, they cannot apply anymore as nomads because you cannot bring your gay partner to Malta, yeah, then they all leave and Malta fucked it up and they lose 50 million. This is 50 million now. In 10 years, it's 500 million. And if the concept of hybrid jurisdictions, will work out, that Malta can have a digital ID, digital citizens, then this can be 500 million or even more. And then we have power. And this is how it should be. Without going into confrontation, without going to protests, this doesn't work. You see what is happening in France, the most democratic country in the world. They come and hit you. So, and I think doing so, we enable people to have more freedom, by replacing those pillars of control. And the biggest pillar of control, which is about to be introduced, is central bank digital currency. I think it doesn't even fulfill the features of a currency. I think it's
so.
not
Hold on a second. I do want to dive into that, but just to summarize, I want to make sure that I'm understanding everything and highlight it for everybody listening. So Balaji talks about voting with your feet, right? If you don't like where you're living, you can leave so that you're essentially influencing or trying to influence your local government to change, because if they don't, then they're not going to have any citizenry to pay taxes and grow. Now, in really democratic countries like France, US, etc., protests generally are some kind of activism is generally the way that people are using their voices to influence change. And I think it's interesting that you say that doesn't work. I think it definitely has its place, but I think the voting with our feet definitely applies a lot of pressure. And it also changes the dynamic in that you're not only applying pressure to your local government by leaving, you're also improving the other government that you're moving to, which is a threat to your local government in the game of the prisoner's dilemma of all the countries in the world, right? Who are competing for your citizenry, your taxes, your benefits. So to summarize, you are saying that we should use this newfound freedom, taking advantage of this global trend of an increase in globalization, an increase in remote work, and that this is going to happen regardless of what countries want. And so let's work together to not only create a network state that connects all of these digital nomads and remote workers into a centralized organization where we can crowdfund, we could potentially buy enclaves within countries or real estate within countries. And not only that, but co-own these properties so that, like you were saying with this co-living DAO, the problem with co-living today is that these people are paying rent, but they're not owning any of the assets, where real estate is one of the best asset classes out there. And so in this case, they would be able to partially own these properties and earn, not only pay rent from owning them. So that also facilitates not only their mobility and freedom to live in a bunch of different places, because they literally own different co-living spaces with a bunch of other people. And we'll have to talk about like the practicality of availabilities and stuff, but still it's much better than the existing system. And so it's economically empowering everybody, and it's allowing them to move freely, which also influences their local government if they don't like the way that things are being done. So there's a lot of stuff to balance there, and I want to like break each separately because and then we'll have to come back to this currency piece. But just for the should we be voting with our feet, or should we be voting with activism and our votes, right? Let's just compare those two ideas. What are the ultimate threats of everybody voting with their feet from a global perspective, right? And what are the threats of people continuing the system as it is through activism and voting?
Yeah, I think the effects of protests, they become less and less because the moment we are outsourcing our decisions to entities which are standing above our countries and nation states, to organizations which we never voted for and never approved and never signed in, then Germany has no decision power anymore over decisions which should be felt within Germany. So what is the point if Germans would go on the street and say, we don't want to have a digital euro, we don't want it, no one wants it, and no one wants it. No one would say that's a good idea. Of course, some people, but they are stupid. Anyway, I mean, so what is the point in going to protest in Germany and clue myself? This is what they're doing. They call themselves last generation and they have a pure heart, but it's like acting within a box. In order to challenge this box, you need to think outside of this box. Okay? And this is also something what I learned during the introduction of this Nomad visa, because it's not like that anyone can just go and say, I do it now, like without anyone approving it, And I started to see how power structures are acting in between the lines, how a lot of CEOs are being just held as puppets. Those people appear nowhere and they control the whole world in between the lines, far more powerful than any president or anyone. They have superpowers because they control so many important people. And I can just say they also wanted to control me. Those CEOs of longevity startups, those people who introduced Nomad visas, there's a tiny group of people behind, and I cannot fight them with protests. That's why we need to have both. Of course, it makes sense to protest, and it's still working, okay? But it's not really efficient. It's like acting in a box, and in the end, the policeman comes and hits you. And this is happening in Germany and France and the US as well.
Yeah. So it's, if societies are using force for peaceful protests, then it's clearly a problem that can't be solved that way. And, the more that slippery slope tends towards totalitarianism, the more I think people should be voting with their feet, no doubt. But if you extrapolate that problem far out into the future, right, and everybody's just moving to the next best place, the next best place, the next best place, eventually, right, the next best place needs to be governed well. And if that final best place also starts sliding, we need a system that can influence the government locally, right? But so, okay, so, right, both are important, and yet still, every country is faced with the same problem, right? We have a rise of globalization, and yet if we as a country don't attract the best talent and grow our economy, we won't be competitive. And if we're not competitive, we won't be in power. If we're not in power, then we won't have control over our lives. And so knowing that, what is it that we can do today to take advantage of this technology to use the co-living? Because I actually think the rise of co-living with the rise of remote work very much go hand in hand. So I'd like to dive into that a little bit and just explain what the work is that Co-Living DAO is doing, how that connects to what you're doing with CoCoHub, and how those fit into the general global trends of rising co-living and remote work.
So the first thing I need to say is, of course, CoCoHub was just a community where nomads or people who want to move into a co-living would join, and they would find nice communities where I also would like to live. So this was the idea. And of course, this is from a capitalistic standpoint. If you have the website with the most co-living traffic and one lead is €1,000 or more, yeah, there's a lot of money behind potential company value. And I decided, or I had this discussion, should I open up CoCoHub and speak about those things, also like spirituality, globalism, like just in general. And because normally you should not do it, you should not mix politics with your business. Okay, so I tested out the waters slowly, like every day writing a little bit more, seeing how many people leave our community. So we have, I think, close to 14,000 Web2 profiles of nomads, and 2,000 are in a Telegram chat. So I started slowly to see if people would leave, if they would say, I don't want to be associated with this. This is two different topics, but I found out there is a huge correlation between this. At the same time, I was like, if I put co-living companies, co-living operators, and there are 211 houses in the moment in the world, 211, like smaller ones, from let's say 6 to 50 beds or something, like privately owned. And I was like, maybe they don't want to be associated with something like this because they run a business in corrupt countries. Not, I mean, where I wanted to open a co-living in India. And I tested the waters in order to see if they want to put their work and their name behind. So everyone was yes. Some were like, I want to speak with you first, Daniel, because I don't want to put my name behind any political extremist opinion. But no, everyone is like, what, this totally makes sense. Especially when you then talk about, we know that you are basically just paying rent for someone who is good with numbers and pay off this loan. Even as a co-living operator, maybe you want to own your property after working for it for 5 or 6 years. I think after 10 years, we would have paid off the property here in Malta, even before. And of course, those co-living DAO, this is something super idealistic. Will it work? Will it not work? The thing is, My father is the head of the biggest housing authority in Germany. Since also like since I was born. So this was a Soviet thing. You know, those Soviet houses they have all over the Soviet Union. Reunification came and they were like, we need to transition this model into, yeah, capitalist world, and it works. So all of these properties, there are like 30,000 apartments, they are owned by the people. It's working since 30 years. They have the lowest prices, the highest quality. So it's working, definitely. And it's needed, but probably it doesn't work in places like London. I don't know. But in Bansko, which is one of the hotspots, a Nomad hotspots in Bulgaria, there is a brilliant German behind who is, yeah, Mr. Nomad, basically. They bought a hotel, 200 apartments, and converting it into a co-owned, co-living. So they are the pioneers, but they are doing it not using crypto. They are doing it a traditional way. And let's see. It seems it can work because one apartment is only 8,000 euros to, I think, 15,000. This is just the tax you save when you leave Germany, okay? And you say, you know what, I travel 1 year to Asia, I don't pay income tax, and I use this saving to buy an apartment in Bansko. Like, it's easy. And then, of course, in an ideal world, as you mentioned, you would have like a utility token and a security token. In easy words, a security token states that you own an asset or this property, and the utility token could be used to rent out this apartment and generate a passive income.
Okay, so let me just explain the tech here for a second for anybody who's not picking up on the terms. So if you were to become a citizen of this co-living DAO or a digital nomad network state of sorts, you could get an NFT or some form of digital identifier or passport that tells the community that you are a owner in that community. And so from a crypto perspective, the reason that would have to be some kind of NFT or something is to make sure that it's immutable, it's yours, it's identifiable as unique to you, just like a passport would be, or a social security number or something like that. And so that allows people to verify their ownership in a particular organization, et cetera. And it could also be something like the rights to a property. And so in this case, right, if it's an organization that's buying a hotel and each individual hotel room is an apartment, this NFT could be your representation of your rights to that apartment within this hotel. And so that's a way to verify that you can live there and that it belongs to you. And then the other piece of the crypto that comes into play here is being able to actually have fractional ownership from a monetary perspective of the real estate asset, so of the apartment, and then getting paid potentially from the profits that this organization is generating automatically through some kind of transaction. Whether that's done through crypto or fiat doesn't really matter as long as it's stable and people can actually benefit. And so these people that you were talking about were doing it fiat. In your example, you can do it with crypto, whatever is more efficient, and gets it done. And so that kind of brings us back to the stablecoin currency discussion. What are the threats there, and how does that come into play with this ownership, this shared ownership?
You mean stablecoins in general?
Yeah, so you were talking about USDC currency having a role to play in influencing nations.
I don't mean stable coins, crypto stable coins. I mean central bank digital currency, which is
Right.
not a currency, which is not crypto. Okay.
Right.
And the roadmap is clear. I mean, I wrote about it like 1 year ago already. Frame banks as evil. They are evil, and issued basically a retail dollar and end user dollar, retail dollar is for banks. The digital euro will be a fork of the digital dollar. So we totally lose our sovereignty because the US is dictating this. And what should I say? This is the end game. Like, we cannot let this happen. And I think digital IDs, like the idea to link fear of death, of COVID, of young people, which was not scientific, to the need of a digital ID, because who are the decision makers in Europe? It's Germany, like mostly, as the leading force here. A German would never accept a digital ID. A German would never accept a digital euro because we don't like digital payments, just because of the past. So you need social engineering to make people okay with the fact. And
can you dive into that a bit? Like, why do you say that they would never accept that because of the past?
Germans have, like, they would never accept a digital euro because they know, first of all, I think the main important point is privacy. Okay, privacy, privacy, privacy. Really simple. If they buy alcohol at the supermarket, they have the fear that their employer, for example, would know that they buy 2 bottles of wine on a Monday. So that's the primitive thinking why they want to have cash. I think just like this, okay? So, and then of course, we need to make the switch from the old euro to the new euro. How do you do this? You do it with the fact that people know they lose their life savings. So this will happen when the inflation rate goes to 2030. And what I'm saying here, I'm not 100% sure, okay? But I mean, I have some sources of people who go to Davos. I know them in person, okay? And in Davos, it is written, it's a clear roadmap, okay? 2022, the big financial reset. And of course, those people who have this roadmap, they are not total masters. They also play chess. Even though they have more kings and know the chess game really well, it doesn't mean they succeed. So we're still in this phase. And so it's about a digital euro, which can be programmed, okay? Which can be, you can only spend it within the borders of Germany. You need to spend it within this time. And of course, it will start with the pension payments and with the income of the people. And then there will be 10 years of coexistence. But clearly, crypto will be framed as something which destroys the environment. I mean, that's why Ethereum switched, no, proof of stake and stuff. And traditional banks will also be framed as evil, going back to 2008, no? It's an easy story to tell. And I don't even think that the intentions are bad here. Okay, so I don't want to say that there are some evil Illuminati forces who do it, who all own us. This is not what I want to say. I think the intentions are to bring carbon emission down of individuals, because in the US, I think you consume 2.3 times of a German or something, and we consume 10 times more than an Indian. So, and how do you bring the consumption down? Not by telling people that they should become minimalists and consume less. This is not working because dopamine is always stronger than this and you cannot come. So they do it basically indirectly, I think, through this system of control, and a German is behind. Good intentions, bad execution. Like, and yeah, I think also we should take responsibility as a German, you know, because first of all, we can have this discussion between you and me, and we don't need to be afraid. But if you are from whatever country, you are afraid. So we need to take responsibility. That's why I also see this in my inner picture, you know, once we have the first big network state breakthrough and we will be on BBC and we will tell the story that we mine like a karma token in those co-living houses, blah, 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 blah. It's a nice positive story. The media will pick up. I want to have a Russian, an American, and a French and a German there, you know, like giving back because we profited the most. And I believe in karma, and I think a lot of really powerful people I had the chance to sit down with and pick their brain. And I talk about people who had 10,000s of employees, okay, who are friends of Bill Clinton, blah, blah, blah. They all agree on this fact. So yeah, did I answer this question? So it's not about a stable coin, it's
Yeah.
about
So I think just correct me if I'm understanding this. If every country were to adopt a CBDC, it would give them much more insight into every consumer trend of their citizenry, of every individual's consumer trends. It would also allow them to change the rules of money, which is, I think, the bigger threat here, right? So, for example, right, if you're in North Korea or in any kind of totalitarian government run by a dictator, and they say, you have to use this currency, which is controlled by the government, and it can be programmed in a way that nobody will accept it as legal tender. That's where it becomes really dangerous, especially when you then extrapolate that out to something like a digital euro, where it's spanning multiple different countries, each with their own laws, but it's accepted already in all of those countries. And so changing it for even one would change it for every other country. And so, it kind of misaligns incentives. Now I see the pros, which is what you also briefly touched on, which is that they want to control carbon emissions. I'd like to dive into how they would do that with that a little bit more. But the cons are also massive, which is, much less privacy, much more control over people and their money, their finances, what they can do, which is basically their power. And then also that this is not really necessary when you're comparing it with the possibility of a decentralized cryptocurrency that cannot be influenced, and the value of it is determined by the people who own it. So as long as you own it and you think it's valuable and somebody else owns it and they think it's valuable, you can have a trade. But the thing is, that only works if everybody believes that it's valuable. And so if you want to use that in a place where that person doesn't think that cryptocurrency is valuable and their country is stuck with a CBDC, you then have to exchange that cryptocurrency for that CBDC to actually use it. And if you're the CBDC issuing country, you don't want that ability. You don't want to allow that to happen. Maybe there is no market. Maybe there's a black market that emerges for that. I don't really know how that would play out. But is that what I'm understanding from the threats of CBDC here?
I mean, first of all, it's about transparency. So if we have all of your transaction recorded into a ledger, and AI becomes cheaper and cheaper, I can, in 20 years from now, analyze everyone, and everyone is a criminal. Every single one of us is a criminal. If I buy weed in Berlin, right now it would be tolerated. But they could say, no, you committed a crime. So, and this will happen, like, because governments, they don't judge from the necessity, but maybe from the possibilities of the technology. At the same time, I mean, such a digital euro would mean all of the off and on ramps into a crypto sphere could be controlled and shut down. Means crypto is dead. So do you want this? This means crypto is dead, and the fight in the moment is definitely against crypto. I mean, FTX, coincidence? This guy? Anyway, so, and then you mentioned like how to bring down carbon emission. Forget that. Maybe that's not the strongest argument. Maybe it's also, as our society becomes more and more complex, because of the internet, because of globalization, because everyone has access to everything, to different opinions. I can send voice messages to someone from New York who is the designer of Kanye. Oh, stupid example, but I can. So society becomes more and more complex, how to keep this together, only with more and more pressure, because you need to force people to agree on one simple truth in a territory which is not working, and people fight, especially if people have an interest to make people fight, and AI is just making this, the narratives more and more extreme. So, and then you have a tool in the last consequence, if there would be a rebellion, for example, and it will come to a rebellion, not because of this, just because history is telling this, it's just a matter of time. And then with this, you could just click and disable anyone who has a different opinion by limiting their spending to 10 euros a day. Stupid examples. Of course, this needs to be the core with our constitution, but they will find ways, okay? This constitution, by the way, also so it's just a way that you can program money and suit any objective with money. Or, for example, they would say, no, you cannot spend money in Russia. What if I have a family in Russia and I go there and have nothing to do with what is happening in a moment? They say, no, if you do it, you would be an enemy of our societies. And I see this happening, that people don't have a healthy opinion anymore. Everything needs to be framed and a label on, and there's nothing in between, good and bad. But what is a bad guy for someone is a good guy for someone else, depending from where you're coming from. And then you ask about how do you force, how should the ideal cryptocurrency look like if the off and on ramps will be closed? And maybe we will frame everyone who already bought Bitcoin the last 4 years as a criminal. Okay, just run a nice script, and then the tax authorities in Germany, they will ask some questions to my parents-in-law. They did nothing wrong, but they will be afraid because tax authorities. So how should such a crypto look like? And a lot of people came to this idea at the same time. I mean, Vitalik calls it soul-bound tokens. My advisor calls it a Jesus coin. I call it a karma coin. And where we are coming from is something really, really simple. I was running a co-living house, and I'm speaking to a lot of other co-living operators. And it's always about community engagement. How it's being done in the moment is you have a community manager, and you take the people by the hand and kick the ass, and let's say, let's go to the beach. Let's do it, let's do it, let's do it. And I did it for 2 years, and I ran out of energy. I had a positive burnout, too many people, but you always need to keep them entertained. So the idea is to empower people to be activity leaders or share their knowledge and give something back. And for this, they don't exchange fiat. It would feel strange if I cook for 12 people and they would pay me in fiat as a thank you. Not for the ingredients, but just for the gesture. And there should be something like a karma point, which can only be earned by being a human. And this is also then coming back to the idea of the French Age of Enlightenment. I mean, you can read the Declaration of Human Rights. It has a different name, but it's the Declaration of the Common Man. The symbol which is standing on top. And I think we should go back and ask the question why we are here on Earth. I think we have more and more science pointing us in the right direction, so we don't need religion anymore. Religion for me is a form of governance before we had money. And this karma coin basically should be used as a, you did something for me and I sent you 1 karma point, but we do KYC so that one wallet is being linked to one person. I don't know how we want to do this KYC. There are different ideas. And we issue, let's say, 10 karma tokens, so you can come to 10 of our events or consume 10 human interactions. Then you don't have any karma tokens anymore. And what do? You start offering something maybe to others, whatever you feel comfortable. So we don't have all of the answers, but no one has answers. So at least go for it. And then Vitalik put his name behind this idea, soul-bound tokens, because they could also be a representation. Are you a good human? I'm running the network state meetups or Nomad Sunset Club meetups. we had 1,000 people coming since the last 18 months. I would have 1,000 karma tokens. So I would be the boss, you know, like the guy. And then others also, or maybe there is a black market then. I would give you karma tokens and you give me a crypto in return without ever exchanging fiat. Because money was usually based on a scarce resource, gold. Then we stopped it. Then it went into the wrong direction the moment US did it. And then we had Bitcoin, you know, which was backed by you need to pay for electricity. That's why it had an intrinsic value, not just based on speculation, but because you need to pay energy. Yeah, and I think karma is also a limited resource. And then you would suit for, at least for me, the best understanding why we are here on this earth. And a lot of really powerful people basically agree on this. So yeah, that's what I believe.
So yeah, there's a lot of interesting ideas there. And I think, you know, that's what all of this is about, is just putting out different ideas for everybody to hear, having an open forum about what different forms of governance should look like, both locally and internationally. So I want to wrap up with kind of summarizing everything before concluding here. So the ways that a international remote working digital nomad network state could benefit from network state technology is access to a global community of like-minded people, greater autonomy and freedom. So that ability to vote with your feet, also live in other places, and having co-ownership of the assets that you're living in, especially where, you know, nomads are pretty much stuck with either, you know, Airbnbs, hostels, hotels, or shorter term leases, which generally are not as financially efficient. Access to digital infrastructure, right? So having a decentralized form of governance that they can all vote on to find laws that are the best for them. And then also protection of personal data, and getting away from the potential scrutiny and overly transparent CBDC type monitoring of citizenry. So that kind of wraps up a lot of the things that we talked about. Before we conclude, what would you say are your top 3 lessons for nomads listening to keep in mind moving forward?
Top 3 lessons. Don't lose yourself in this social media idea, what a nomad should be. It's not about being a vegan, doing yoga. Everyone can be a nomad. I write no dash mad. You are not mad. I think the term nomad will fade. It makes sense to optimize your SEO towards to. But the big move, and this is what I see, will come from people who are ordinarily employed and go for the first time on a remote trip to Asia for 2 months in a co-living. They will never go back into their old life, and I don't need to lecture them. So don't lose yourself in the nomad ego. So advices I would give for a nomad. I don't know. I just see this target audience as the best and the biggest leverage we can have also when it comes to border passes. Because for me, the ultimate goal for now is, or like the strongest 10-year goal, that we bring real life power to a Web3 ID. So I call it a Nomad Pass, whatever. And then we would integrate with existing residence agencies. You know, so you can use your Web3 ID in order to get this visa in a streamlined process without stripping naked in front of governments. I mean, we can trust Malta somehow still, but sending all of this information to another country, I don't know. So here in Malta, you already get a residence card stating you are a nomad. That's your title. And I think it's not only me, also there are others who want to establish or are establishing network states for digital nomads, and they are already speaking with the guys in Dubai if there would be a way. So we are hijacking basically the system from behind, because Malta has the same power like Germany. Germany has no veto if Malta is doing it, that you can enter the country with a Web3 ID. Yeah, they get access to the Schengen area. So that's my approach, and I think that's the strongest point, because for me, whenever I see a nomad on the street and they come to me and they hug me and they tell me their stories, it means a lot for me. You know, those freeing those people, and giving them also access to our economy without bringing them necessarily to London, because prices are already high enough. But why not involve this guy, the software developer from Nigeria, in our economic zone? They cannot even take part because they don't have a bank account. They cannot come here. I mean, if you have an high income, you can manage everything, but the ordinary people can't. So yeah, but there are still 2 advices missing for nomads. I think you are part of something amazing, and be proud of it, because I think we will tell our kids about the early days. And it's super positive, you know, because we spoke now for such a long time about those heavy topics, and it's like training, you know. If you look too long into the abyss, you become this. So, and that's why for me it's like, okay, we understood the problem, and we just try to act with positivity. And the story of nomads, young people, is positive. Positivity is always stronger than negativity. So it's also about giving hope, because who is giving hope in the moment? Honestly, who should I? Elon Musk? I can subscribe to his social media feed, and then every morning I have hope. But our leaders, they don't give hope. They're just reacting, basically. So I think it's about hope, because the world is really not such a bad place. It's just social media is emphasizing this, and we all think the world will end, but no.
Cool. I don't think there's a better way to end than that. Thank you so much for taking part in this interview. You shared so much value for our listeners. Where can people get in touch with you or follow your work?
It's called CoCoHub, CoCoHub. Or just Google co-living and then your random city, and we are #1 on Google, hopefully.
Awesome. All right. Thanks again for all of our listeners. Be sure to follow up with Daniel Go. We spent months vetting these speakers because we knew they'd be really valuable to you. So definitely check them out and follow what they're up to. Daniel, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.